A surprising day in court for the president's former national security advisor. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
And I'm John Jessup. Well, Michael Flynn stood before a Washington, D.C. judge today, expecting anywhere from no time to 6 months in prison for pleading guilty to lying to the FBI.
But the day didn't quite turn out that way. Amber Strong is outside the court with the twists and turns inside today's hearing.
It was a day of expected drama here at this D.C. courtroom. The president's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, walked through those doors expecting to be sentenced for lying to the FBI about conversations he had with Russia Ambassador Sergei Kislyak. Instead, a judge decided to delay that sentencing. Throughout the hearing, U.S. District Judge Emmett Sullivan asked repeatedly if Flynn knew that lying to the FBI was a crime, to which Flynn answered, "Yes, Your Honor." Observers say the judge then turned toward a flag and told Flynn, "Arguably, you sold your country out." After that, Sullivan warned Flynn if he received a sentence today, he wouldn't get full credit for his assistance in ongoing investigations. After a short recess, Flynn's attorneys took Sullivan up on the offer to delay the sentencing for 90 days. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders had this to say about today's events.
Let's remember what the whole thing that this started is supposed to be about. It's whether or not Russia influenced the election and whether or not the president had anything to do with it. We know that Russia tried to create chaos within the election, but certainly not that they actually impacted it. It's perfectly acceptable for the president to make a positive comment about somebody while we wait to see what the court's determination is.
Now, the president has long defended Flynn, basically saying that he was set up by the FBI, even taking to Twitter to wish him luck. It's yet to be seen what role Flynn will play in these ongoing investigations, especially when it comes to the Russia probe. As they say, time will tell, and in this case, 90 days. Amber Strong, CBN News in Washington.
All right, thank you, Amber. Well, the White House may be ready to compromise on border wall money and avert the coming partial government shutdown. But Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says it's disappointing Congress hasn't voted on a funding measure.
That's right. And for more on that, we go to Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson. Abigail, what's the White House saying? And more importantly, maybe how are lawmakers responding to today's news?
Well, the White House is saying that the president is willing to let up on that demand for $5 billion for border security because they believe they could find the money in funding in other departments. So that's going to help make the negotiations a little easier. And the good news is both sides agree that a shutdown is a terrible idea. And this afternoon, both Republican and Democratic leadership in the Senate expressed that they are committed to funding the government by Friday, avoiding this shutdown, and that they also both feel fairly confident that they will reach some agreement, but neither side seems to know what that agreement will look like as of now. Let's take a look at Majority Leader Mitch McConnell on where things stand right now.
We had a discussion about a proposal that we offered that I thought was reasonable to both sides to give us an opportunity to, in effect, thread the needle on the border security issue. I've heard back from Senator Schumer that the offer was not acceptable, and so now I'm in consultation with the White House about the way forward. I think there's certainly bipartisan support for avoiding a government shutdown.
Now, right now, there are many ideas being thrown around, but as McConnell said, he's waiting to see what the president might sign, and they are still negotiating.
So, Abigail, what happens next?
Well, procedurally, the clock is ticking. They have to reach an agreement, and they have to bring it to the floor fairly soon, I'd say in the next 24 hours, in order to get something passed by that midnight deadline on Friday. That is if they want a long-term agreement. If they want a continuing resolution, that buys them a little more time. But they're really hoping not just to put a Band-Aid on this situation and to find something that's more long-term. A possible hiccup, though, is that the president said that they will find that $5 billion of money in other departments, but Senator Schumer responded to that claim this afternoon, saying that in order for him to do that, he would have to get congressional approval, and that he does not believe that Congress will agree to that. And so that could cause a hiccup in these negotiations this week. So really, it's anyone's guess what type of compromise they will reach.
Abby, we're a little bit short on time, so real quickly, beyond funding the government and criminal justice reform, what else is on Congress's plate before they start the new session in January?
Those are the two big things. They passed the Farm Bill last week. That was the third priority for McConnell. The criminal justice reform bill is expected to pass tomorrow afternoon. And funding the government, they're already here longer than they expected. We might see a few more judges confirmed, but other than that, those are the two big ones. And then they'll hopefully be heading home.
Abigail Robertson on Capitol Hill. Thank you so much, Abigail.
Well, the White House says it is now looking at different agencies to help find all of the money it wants for border protection. Although critics argue a border wall won't solve illegal immigration into the United States, some wall supporters suggest the U.S. should take a lesson from one of its closest allies, Israel. Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem.
During a sometimes heated Oval Office meeting with congressional Democrats over U.S. border security, President Trump pointed to Israel as an example to consider.
If you really want to find out how effective a wall is, just ask Israel. 99.9% effective. And our wall will be every bit as good as that, if not better.
8 years ago, Israel faced its own border security crisis when thousands of Africans from nations like Sudan, Ethiopia, and Eritrea came across its southern border. By 2012, 55,000 illegal immigrants flooded into Israel.
They came into Israel illegally. They caused major problems in southern Tel Aviv, which was already a little bit run down, but the rape rate and the murder rates skyrocketed from those 55,000 illegal immigrants.
David Rubin, author of Trump and the Jews, remembers the debate Israelis went through.
There were protests in Israel. There were a lot of people from southern Tel Aviv, those neighborhoods, the residents who were protesting.
Israel's solution? Build a high-tech fence along its southern border. It eventually cost nearly $500 million, one of the most expensive projects in Israel's history. The fence runs more than 150 miles, stretching from the Gaza Strip to the Israeli town of Eilat on the Red Sea.
The wall was finished in 2015. In 2016, there were 11 illegal immigrants to Israel from that southern border. In 2017, there were 0 illegal immigrants to Israel from that southern border. So I think the evidence is clear. The wall works.
In addition to stopping the flow of illegal immigrants, the fence has helped with many other key needs.
No doubt, if that wall and that fence didn't exist, there would be many more terrorist attacks, and the free movement of those terrorists that are coming in from Egypt or from Sinai into Israel, we've now stopped that from taking place.
Israel only had to build a 150-mile wall, while the U.S. faces a 2,000-mile border with Mexico. Even so, how could this possibly help with the current debate in the U.S. about a border wall?
We're very happy to have the high technology and the creativity and the entrepreneurship that we do in Israel, and we're very happy for our friends in America to learn from us.
However Congress and the White House reconcile their differences about border security, Israel can point to one wall that works. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, Martha McSally gave her farewell speech in the House last week, and now she'll be heading to the Senate. Arizona's governor has tapped McSally to replace Senator Jon Kyl, who resigned last week. Kyl began serving in the role only temporarily after Senator John McCain passed away. You may recall McSally lost a race for Arizona's other Senate seat to Democrat Kyrsten Sinema.
So grounding myself in what's the truth, what's the right thing to do, what's best for the country, what's best for the people I represent, and prayerfully seeking that always in humility is an important part of staying grounded for me.
McSally will serve in the Senate until 2020, and then Arizona voters will get to decide on who will serve the final 2 years of McCain's term.
Well, President Trump's School Safety Commission is trying to make schools safer, and the group formed earlier this year after the deadly shooting in Parkland, Florida. Here are the recommendations they are making right now. First, rolling back an Obama-era policy discouraging schools from reporting violent minority students to police. That was started because minority students faced discipline far more often than others. but the commission says it's led to schools not to take action. The panel also provides guidelines for schools that want to arm teachers and other school employees, but stop short of recommending they do so. They call on states and communities to consider laws making it easier to temporarily remove or block guns to individuals at risk of being violent. And they recommend schools beef up physical security, like adding a blast-proof glass. And they call on local agencies to develop rating systems for violent video games. Here is President Trump.
My administration is pursuing a comprehensive strategy to address school violence. We enacted 2 critical reforms into law: the Fix NICS Act, which you know about, which strengthens very strongly the background checks for firearm purchases, and the Stop School Violence Act, which provides grants to schools to improve safety. And they've gone a long way. We've also secured historic levels of funding to give schools and police more resources to protect their students. This morning, we also completed the process to issue a new regulation banning bump stocks.
Well, as school violence is on the rise, homeschooling across America has seen tremendous growth over the last 20 years.
Charlene Aaron brings us that story.
School shootings have become much too common, with more than 20 in 2018 alone. Following each event, the heated debate erupts of how to best protect schools and those inside. Still no answer. After 17 died in the Valentine's Day shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas in Florida, thousands of young people marched on Washington, demanding tougher federal gun laws. Organizers here at the Virginia Homeschool Convention say in light of recent school shootings, they're hearing from more parents who are considering teaching their kids at home.
Anytime there has been a tragedy like the school shootings that we all have seen on the news, we get lots and lots of phone calls, more than ever before. In fact, we have had, through the past couple of years, seen more and more parents calling us because their children are suffering anxiety, because they're afraid to go to school.
For that reason, LaToya Daniels says she's already decided her 3-year-old daughter won't be attending public school when the time comes.
I'm very concerned because I have cousins that their moms and them tell me that they're coming home talking about guns in school, and they're also talking about little kids that are talking about they want to do things with them that are very inappropriate, and that bothers me because I don't want my kids to be a part of that.
For parents who don't know if they can homeschool, Jim Mason of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association says it's become more accessible.
Homeschooling today is available in a way that it hadn't been in years past, even to people who may not be able to do it themselves. So, for example, retired grandparents can homeschool your children. There are a lot of online options. We help a lot of people who work full-time but nevertheless homeschool their children.
Christina Truess teaches her 4 boys at home because she says her top priority is protecting them both physically and spiritually.
I am thankful that we're able to stay home and that they are safe in my care. My school is always armed, and I do appreciate that. I'm thankful that I'm able to have a good eye on them, and that it's not just about their physical safety, but their spiritual safety. I'm able to guard what is going inside their minds and inside their hearts.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News, Richmond.
Thanks, Charlene. Well, the next step in putting a U.S. military branch in outer space is underway. By executive order, President Trump is directing the Pentagon to establish a command overseeing all military activities in this new frontier.
A new era of American national security in space begins today.
Vice President Mike Pence announced the nation's groundbreaking command today at the Kennedy Space Center.
All engines running. Launch commit.
The announcement comes nearly 50 years after the Apollo 8 astronauts became the first humans to orbit the moon and return to Earth.
We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you.
As the 3 astronauts rounded our moon for the 9th time that Christmas Eve, they took turns reading from the book of Genesis.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light.
But today, space is much different. The White House says adversaries like Russia and China are transforming it into a war-fighting domain.
When it comes to defending America, it is not enough to merely have an American presence in space. We must have American dominance in space.
NASA will not be part of this initiative, however, since the Air Force already oversees a small space command. Critics of this executive order argue that shows the military is already protecting American interests in space.
The U.S. Space Command will integrate space capabilities across all branches of the military.
As this 21st century space race continues, the White House contends the need to stay ahead has never been more urgent. Pence says that will require one other thing.
Faith in the capacity of our people to accomplish anything in the defense of and the advance of freedom. And we'll also do it with that other kind of faith as well.
Vice President Mike Pence also says 18,000 Americans are currently working in space operations for the sake of our national security.
When we come back, new developments in the case of a Cross Memorial in Maryland. A senior living center in Washington state is banning forms of religious expression this Christmas season. Residents can't say Merry Christmas, sing religious Christmas songs, or display any decorations with religious themes. The complex says they instituted the ban to comply with rules from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. But the Alliance Defending Freedom says that is not the case and is calling on the Senior Living Center to reverse its rules, saying, quote, given that your justifications for disallowing religious holiday expression directly contradict the position of HUD on the permissibility of Christmas displays, we hope that this letter will clear up these issues and that you will do away with this terrible policy.
Well, a case involving a memorial cross appears to be moving forward at the Supreme Court. The memorial honoring Maryland men who were killed in World War I has been standing in Bladensburg in suburban Washington, D.C. since 1925. An appeals court ruled it unconstitutional, and it could come down if the High Court doesn't intervene. Lawyers from Liberty First Institute have just filed opening briefs to have the case heard, and Paul Strand has more.
It's a cross-shaped memorial on public property.
Jeremy Dice of First Liberty Institute warns if the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't intervene, this could have far-reaching repercussions across America.
Not only will this monument have to be razed to the ground, but so will any monument that bears religious imagery or language on the side of it as well.
That would include features in Arlington National Cemetery and its most famous site.
The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is a World War I monument as well, and it says on the side very famously, of course, here lies a soldier known but to God. And who knows where this would end.
That's why religious rights lawyers like Dice have fought alongside the American Legion for years to preserve the Bladensburg Memorial, and by extension, many others.
These are important reminders of the great cost that freedom comes to us in, that is, real lives have been sacrificed in the service of freedom. We should not desecrate their memory by tearing down their gravestone.
Carved into this memorial in big letters are 4 words: courage, endurance, valor, and devotion. Now the question is if America is devoted enough to the memory of the men honored here to assure the monument to their ultimate sacrifice endures.
It is almost spitting at them in the eye to even suggest that we would tear down this memorial.
Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from the World War I Veterans Memorial, Bladensburg, Maryland.
Coming up, the crackdown on Christianity in China. The State Department calls China one of the world's worst violators of religious freedom, just this month announcing it as one of 10, quote, countries of particular concern. As Johnny Moore, an evangelical advisor to President Trump, told me, religious oppression is faced by more than just Christians.
It seems like there's a relapse to another moment in Chinese history which was more repressive towards religious freedom. And this is a major change. I mean, in the last 10 years, we thought we were seeing an openness in China. And for the Muslim community, it's even worse. You know, the Chinese have put 1 million Muslims in re-education camps to try to make them more Chinese and make them less religious. And so we decided just to write an open letter to the president of China and say, there have to be better ways of handling this, and appealing to him to handle it differently.
Well, the Christian church in China has also been facing a crackdown by its president. Authorities recently arrested a prominent pastor and more than 100 of his church members.
It is just the latest move against churches there. George Thomas has more.
This past Sunday, members of Early Rain Covenant Church were blocked from entering their worship building. With their leaders detained and facing jail, churchgoers decided to pray and worship outside.
On December 9th, authorities in the city of Chengdu arrested prominent Christian pastor Wang Yi, along with his wife and 100 members of Early Rain Covenant Church. Authorities shut down the church and charged Pastor Wang with inciting subversion of state power. He and his wife could face up to 15 years in prison if convicted.
Early Rain, like scores of other congregations, is outside government control as part of China's burgeoning so-called underground or house church movement. Appearing on CBN News' World Beat, Todd Nettleton of Voice of the Martyrs says this movement has touched every corner of China.
And that's the exciting thing, is all across China there are house churches, there are what they call family churches. And the reason the communist government is so worried is because there are far more Christians in China than there are members of the Communist Party.
Nettleton says Beijing is waging a brutal and widespread crackdown to stop the growth of these unregistered churches.
This crackdown, I think, is a direct response to the fear of the Communist Party leaders, who see the church growing way faster than the party is.
Mr. Yang, has China declared war on Christianity?
Yes. Fang Gong Wang, a leading expert on religion in China, says what started several years ago as a small government campaign against unregistered churches has turned into all-out war.
The campaign was first experimented in Zhejiang province in 2014 to 2016. Now it has become a nationwide campaign.
A campaign where authorities routinely target houses of worship, destroy crosses, burn Bibles, and arrest pastors. Mr. Fang Gong, who once predicted that China could become the world's largest Christian nation, says the government, headed by Xi Jinping, views Christianity as a threat to the party's long-term political aspirations.
Christians are the remaining NGOs in the shrinking civil society in China. And under Xi Jinping, and the Chinese Communist Party is really trying to establish a totalitarian rule of Chinese society. And the Christians are standing in the way of totalitarianism. So that's why they became a target.
Pictures shared on Early Rain's Facebook page claim to show that police physically abused some of those arrested after they were taken into custody. Foreseeing this possible arrest, Pastor Wang wrote a letter titled "My Declaration of Faithful Disobedience," with instructions that it should be published if he went missing for more than 48 hours. In it, Wang vowed to use non-violent methods to stand against Chinese laws he believed were against the Bible and God. "My Savior Christ also requires me to joyfully bear all costs for disobeying wicked laws," Wang wrote. "I am filled with anger and disgust at the persecution of the church by this communist regime, at the wickedness of their depriving people of the freedoms of religion and of conscience." Wang is no stranger to authorities. He was once one of China's most prominent civil rights lawyers and intellectuals. In 2005, he had an encounter with Jesus Christ and decided to convert to Christianity. He gave up his law career to pursue his calling as a pastor and started Early Rain in China's Sichuan province. His sermons, many of them widely circulated on social media, soon made him a rising star and an important player in the Christian revival that was sweeping China. All that has come to a screeching halt with his arrest and the closure of the church. Still, members of his congregation vowed to keep meeting despite the risk of arrest. George Thomas, CBN News.
Great reporting by George, and just a great story as a reminder of our responsibility to pray for the persecuted church, our brothers and sisters around the world.
Yeah, and it's not just Christians, too. In China, 1 million Muslims are in what they call re-education camps. So religious persecution is very real, and it's something to certainly be mindful about.
Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great night.